The next morning, Nathan woke to find the squirrel still in her corner, her kits nestled against her. She watched him with wary eyes as he moved about the house. He decided to check with his neighbors to see if anyone had encountered the squirrel before. Armed with his phone, he snapped a couple of photos and ventured out into the snow. The neighborhood was quiet, blanketed in white. Nathan knocked on a few doors, showing the photos to anyone who answered. Most were shocked to hear about a squirrel taking shelter in his home, but none recognized her or her kids. One neighbor suggested calling animal control, but Nathan dismissed the idea. He couldn't bring himself to separate the mother from her kids, especially in her condition. Returning home, Nathan searched online for any reports of missing squirrels or unusual sightings in the area. He found nothing. The more he thought about it, the more he felt a sense of responsibility for the family. They had come to him for help, and he was determined to see them through this tough time. Over the next few days, Nathan adjusted to living with his unusual guests. He bought fresh nuts, seeds, and fruits to ensure the squirrel and her kits were well fed. He also set up a small litter area in case they needed it. The mother squirrel remained cautious but began to show signs of trust. She allowed Nathan to come closer, even letting him clean up around her without protest. One evening, as Nathan prepared dinner, he noticed the mother squirrel acting restless. She paced around the living room, her ears flattened and her tail twitching. He quickly realized what was happening. She was going into labor. Nathan scrambled to make her as comfortable as possible, adding more blankets to her corner and dimming the lights. The birth was a quiet affair, punctuated only by the soft chirps of the newborn kits. Nathan kept his distance, giving her the space she needed. When it was over, she lay exhausted but proud, her new kits nursing at her side. Nathan felt a surge of admiration for her strength and resilience. He marveled at the tiny kits, their eyes closed and their fur damp. They were perfect. Over the following weeks, Nathan's home transformed into a sanctuary. The squirrel family thrived under his care. The older kits grew more adventurous, exploring every nook and cranny of the house, while the newborns stayed close to their mother, their tiny chirps filling the air. Nathan found himself completely enchanted by them. He invested in climbing structures and toys to keep the older kits entertained, and even researched ways to ensure the squirrels' health and safety. Despite their wild nature, the squirrels seemed to adapt well to life indoors. The mother maintained her vigilance, often watching Nathan with her piercing eyes, but her trust in him was evident. She allowed him to approach her kits and even accepted food from his hand. Nathan, in turn, respected her boundaries and worked to create a balance that suited them both. The snowstorm eventually passed, but Nathan knew he couldn't simply release the squirrel family back into the wild. The kits were too young, and the mother still needed time to recover. He consulted with a local wildlife expert who advised him on how to care for them until they were ready to be reintroduced to their natural habitat. Months passed, and the squirrel family became an integral part of Nathan's life. The older kits grew stronger and more independent, their playful antics bringing joy to his days. The newborns opened their eyes and began to explore, their tiny paws patting softly across the floor. The mother squirrel remained the heart of the family, her presence commanding respect and admiration. Nathan often reflected on how much his life had changed since that fateful winter evening. His once quiet home was now filled with the sounds of life and laughter. The bond he had formed with the squirrel family was unlike anything he had ever experienced. They had come to him seeking refuge, but in the end, they had given him something far greater, a sense of purpose and connection. As spring approached, Nathan began to prepare for the next chapter. He worked with wildlife experts to ensure the squirrel family could safely transition back to the wild. It was a bittersweet process, but Nathan knew it was the right thing to do. He built an outdoor enclosure in his backyard to help them acclimate to the outside world. The mother squirrel took to it naturally, teaching her kits the skills they would need to survive. The day eventually came when the squirrel family was ready to leave. Nathan opened the enclosure, watching as the mother led her kits toward the tall trees at the edge of the yard. She paused at the base of one, turning back to look at him one last time. Nathan felt a lump in his throat as he raised a hand in farewell. Then, with a flick of her tail, she disappeared into the branches, her kits following close behind. On a chilly winter evening, Nathan came upon a peculiar sight at his doorstep. The biting cold of the wind carried with it a faint cry, and upon investigating, he discovered an unexpected visitor. A wild squirrel stood just outside his porch, her dark, inquisitive eyes fixed on him with a mix of caution and desperation. Her fur was fluffed against the cold, but her ribs pressed faintly against her sides, suggesting she had endured a hard journey. Behind her, two tiny squirrel kits huddled close, their small bodies trembling in the biting wind. Nathan froze. His initial reaction was one of disbelief. A squirrel with kits, no less. The situation was unlike anything he had ever encountered. Yet as he stood there, the squirrel moved closer, her tiny paws pressing against the glass of his door, almost as if she were asking permission to enter. The sheer audacity of her actions made Nathan hesitate. He had heard stories of wild animals seeking refuge during extreme weather, but seeing it unfold before him was surreal. He opened the door slightly, letting the warm air escape into the night. The squirrel remained still, her kits pressing tighter against her. Something about her gaze compelled Nathan to act. Ignoring the voice in his head warning him about the risks, he unbolted the door fully. To his surprise, the squirrel stepped inside cautiously, her kits trailing after her. The icy wind followed, but he quickly shut the door, sealing out the cold. The squirrel's fur carried patches of frost, and her kits were visibly shivering. She shook herself off, scattering droplets onto the wooden floor. Nathan stood at a safe distance, unsure of what to do next. The mother squirrel sniffed the air, her sharp eyes darting around the room. Her kits clung to her, their soft chirps tugging at his heart. Whatever had driven this creature to his home must have been dire. Nathan retreated to the kitchen to prepare something warm. He didn't have anything specific for wild animals, but he found some nuts and seeds he had for baking and warmed them slightly. He placed the food on a plate and set it on the floor a few feet away from the squirrel. She sniffed the air again before cautiously approaching. Her kits followed, but she nudged them back, ensuring she inspected the food first. Satisfied it wasn't a threat, she began eating, her kits joining in after a moment. Watching her, Nathan noticed her swollen belly. The realization hit him. She wasn't just a mother of two, she was pregnant. This explained her boldness in seeking shelter. He marveled at the trust she showed in allowing him near her kits. Despite being a wild animal, she seemed to sense that Nathan meant no harm. As the evening wore on, Nathan found himself captivated by his unexpected guests. The kits began to explore their surroundings, their curiosity overtaking their initial fear. They stumbled over furniture, their tiny claws skittering on the hardwood floor. The mother squirrel watched them closely, her ears twitching at every sound. Nathan couldn't help but smile at their antics. As the night deepened, the snowstorm outside intensified. Nathan prepared a makeshift bed for the squirrel and her kits using blankets and an old box. He set it up in the corner of the living room near the fireplace. The mother squirrel approached it hesitantly, sniffing the fabric. Once she deemed it safe, she settled down, her kits curling up beside her. Nathan watched from a distance, amazed at how naturally they fit into his home. Nathan stood there for a long time, the silence of the forest enveloping him. He felt a profound sense of gratitude for the time they had shared. The squirrel family had left an indelible mark on his life, and he knew he would carry their memory with him always. In the months that followed, Nathan often found himself looking out into the woods, wondering how they were faring. He liked to imagine the mother squirrel teaching her kits to climb and forage, their wild spirits thriving in the freedom of nature. Though they were gone, their presence lingered in his home, in the toys they had played with and the memories they had created. Nathan's life returned to its quiet rhythm, but it was forever enriched by the experience. The squirrel family had taught him the value of trust, compassion, and the unbreakable bond between living beings. And on cold winter nights when the wind howled outside, he would smile, remembering the warmth and love they had brought into his home.